What have we sacrificed out of love for Christ? What self-giving have we been part of that has made a difference because Jesus died for us? Where have we died a little for our faith? Where have we made a sacrifice because of our faith? What kind of social death have we risked because of our faith? What have we done that shows our children that Jesus matters? And the way into this is to ask this question: what risk did somebody take for you that showed you that Jesus mattered? What sacrifice did someone make so that you know that Jesus actually changes things? I've been asking people a lot that lately. This is a piece that was unexplored in my research and certainly by the National Study of Youth and Religion. But I'm coming to believe that this may be the most important thing we can do of all. I've asked people about various forms of these radical things that they've done. For example, radical hospitality. Okay? Radical acts of hospitality. Colleen Keith is the president of Spartanburg Methodist College. And she told me this story. Spartanburg Methodist is a 2-year college in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina, and these kids, it's not a school that has a lot of press or a lot of money. And a couple years ago, their basketball team made the national championships for their division, somewhere in Kansas. Well, it turns out Spartanburg Methodist didn't have the money to send a cheering squad for the basketball team. So the president of the college called every Methodist church in the county surrounding where they were having these championships. And she explained the situation. She said, so look, we've got these kids that are coming out to play this national championship. Could you get people in your congregation? These congregations were 30 people, 20 people, 40 people. They were really old, aging congregations. And she said, could you get some people in your congregation to just go to these games and cheer for these kids? And if you do, I'll send you a t-shirt, Well, guess what? There were a dozen churches in that area that hadn't talked to each other in years. But they all sent people to cheer these kids at this basketball team. And these white-haired people, and these bald people, and these folks that hadn't been at a basketball game in 30 years were in the bleachers in their red t-shirts cheering on Spartanburg Methodist with young people they had never met before. Radical acts of hospitality. Becoming a person of faith, you see, makes a difference. Radical service. I hear lots of stories about this. Adam told me about his grandfather when Adam was a teenager. His grandfather every single weekend asked Adam, would you come ride in my truck with me? And Adam thought that was weird, and he said no most of the time. But finally, to get his grandfather off his back, he said, yeah, I'll come with you one Saturday. So they got up at 7 in the morning. And that was when Adam realized that his grandfather, every Saturday, his one day off, was taking meals to people all around the county on behalf of the church. Following Jesus makes a difference. Preston worked construction with his dad. They didn't have a lot of money, and they were really out of work, and they got a big job at a church putting up drywall. Preston was excited because he thought, okay, we're going to have some cash to deal with. And when the pastor went to pay his dad refused it, said, no, we did this one for Jesus. Following Jesus makes a difference. Radical practices and acts of piety. I hear about family devotions from families who've made their kids get up out of bed at 7 in the morning to pray together. My dean, a guy named Daryl Guter, talked about when he was a youth minister in California. Here's what youth ministry training looked like. All the youth ministers in their church went to the youth leader's house, and then she did training for them. What training looked like was this. At 9 in the morning, they got down on their knees and started praying. They got up at noon. That was how they trained their youth ministry team. Radical acts of piety. And I've heard stories about radical grace and mercy. Brian told me about being a bedwetter when he was about 7 or 8 years old. And his parents, who were very faithful people, and they were very close as a family, but his parents were at wit's end about this. And they got so mad one day that they made Brian sit down and write 100 times, I will not wet the bed, I will not wet the bed, I will not wet the bed. And Brian said with every sentence, the shame just got more and more overwhelming. To finally, he quit and he ran into his parents' room and said, "Why are you making me do this? This isn't going to help anything. I'm ashamed enough as it is." And his parents realized right away that they'd made a mistake, and they apologized. And they said, "You don't have to finish this." So Brian went to his room, and pretty soon, Brian's dad came in, and he apologized again. And he gave him the list and he said, "Here, I finished it for you." And Brian read the list, and what was written there 100 times was, "I love my son, I love my son, I love my son." Now, none of these adults thought they were doing anything radical for their faith. They weren't radical because they were extreme. They were radical because they were deeply connected to the root of what it means to be someone who follows Christ through acts of self-giving, acts of sacrifice, acts of love that show people what it looks like to live a cross-shaped life. But because God's grace gave these people the courage and the honesty to risk this vulnerability with young people, They saw adults living this world upside down. They saw who saw people the way Christ sees them and not as the world sees them. And these people, they may have followed Jesus just once in front of you, but it mattered. It showed that when Christ gets involved in people's lives, it changes things. A story that I remember is from my grandmother. We had Thanksgiving. I think I was 12 years old. Extended family around tables, set up in the living room and so on, and knock at the door just as we sat down to eat. Now, my grandmother was not expecting anybody, but she opened the door, and there was this homeless guy who was in the neighborhood from time to time. And I will never forget her reaction. She went up to him, and with a big smile on her face, she said, "Why, Mr. Edwards," she called him by name, "Mr. Edwards, won't you come in and sit down? There's a table space right over here." Now, she wasn't expecting Mr. Edwards more than the man on the moon. But that Thanksgiving, we had dinner with Mr. Edwards. And all these years later, that's what I remember when I think of a radical act of grace. Somebody did that for you. So this is the last time I'll ask you to go back to your partner, but I think it's worth spending a little bit of time remembering one radical act that somebody did for you that showed you what loving Christ really meant. Go. But these stories matter. It matters that we tell them, and it matters that we pay them forward. I mean, when people realize that God is involved in their lives, things are different. Fortunately, in our culture, most of us don't actually risk our lives for our faith. But if we're honest, most of us can think of a sacrifice that we could have made for Jesus that we didn't. You see, you don't have to go to Bolivia to do a radical thing for your faith. You've just shared 900 stories of ways people did this for you. Give away 20% of your income. That'll catch people's attention. Keep the Sabbath if you really want to be countercultural in a young person's life. Participate in a struggling congregation instead of a thriving one. Share your home. Get on your knees when you pray, or pray the hours, or pray at 6 a.m., but let your children catch you at it once or twice. Commit as a family to build a well. Quit your job and go to seminary, but if you do that, tell your kids why you're going. It's not just that mom or dad needs a different job. See, if we're going to be a church that helps Louie's mom and that by extension helps Louie, then we're going to have to learn this everyday radicality that makes it obvious that when the church gets involved in the world, things change, grace happens, resurrection happens. Because if God cannot use the church to bring game-changing grace into the world, God will use any opening God can find and will enter the world there instead. I don't know if you have heard of a group called Improv Everywhere. Anybody heard of this group? All right, well, it's based in New York, I think, but it's kind of all over the world now. I learned about this from my pastor. Remember, my pastors are students. And what Improv Everywhere does, they use flash mobs to go into a public situation and to change one variable about it that will make the whole thing look very different. So the first one that I saw, I caught on YouTube. It was a wedding reception that they had in a park across the street from a Justice of the Peace office. And what happened was, this guy comes up to this couple coming out of the JP's office and said, they'd just been married, and said, would you guys like a free wedding reception? And the couple goes, okay. And they cross the street, and there's a tent set up, and there's a band, and there's a dance floor, and there are presents. There's a cake. They had to wait until they learned who they were to write their names on it. There are people dressed up like bridesmaids and people dressed up like groomsmen, and they begin to dance. And as the video goes on, it's only 2 or 3 minutes, but you can see the changed look on the bride and groom's face going from bewilderment to really to this is fabulous. And I thought this was a church that did that. And I thought, oh my gosh, what church does this cool ministry? And then I found out it wasn't a church. It was a group of random young adults who just like to bring joy into people's lives. And I thought, wait a minute, why wasn't this the church? Then I got mad, you know? And now, a sidebar, somebody sent me a news article about a church outside in Athens, Georgia that actually does this for people, just FYI. So it's possible that it could be us, but in this case it wasn't. The mission of Improv Everywhere is, and here's their stated mission statement, to give people the story of a lifetime. And then I really got mad. I'm like, wait a minute, aren't we the story of a lifetime, people? Isn't that what we're supposed to be helping people find? Here's my favorite one. It's called The Best Game Ever. And here we have a bunch of young adults that infiltrate a Little League game, and they treat it like the World Series. I wonder how Louie's mom would have reacted if she would have seen the church interact with her son this way instead of through the school that we saw. Watch.
What we're going to do today is we have picked a random Little League game that is taking place here in Hermosa Beach, California, and we are going to turn this Little League game, played by 10-year-olds, into a Major League Baseball game. So we know all the players' names, we know all their nicknames, we know the batting order. The players are not in on it. They have no idea that anything unusual is happening today. Let's have a fun day, and let's make this their best game ever.
Everybody up here to the booth. Jim Gray along with Charlie Todd. A beautiful day for baseball here in Hermosa Beach.
We're of course coming to you live from the NBC Jumbotron. Base hit.
The lug nuts. A 3-2 lead.
Well, Jim, I understand we have our field reporter, Eric Appel, down on the field, who's going to give us a little taste of what's going down there at ground level. Eric.
Hey, how you doing? We're going to come over here and talk to some fans. I can barely hear because people are going so crazy. Hey, how you guys doing?
Oh, we're doing fantastic.
You guys know you're not wearing shirts, right?
Well, we got the Mudcats.
Yeah.
Oh, we're cheering.
Mudcat spirit keeps us warm. Well, it looks like the Mudcat spirit is keeping these guys warm.
All right, thank you very much for that report, Eric. And we've got a player on the field here.
Well, that's number 14, holding his knee. May just be a cramp. Okay.
Crowd gives Jake a round of applause.
Maybe you just want a little camera time, Charlie.
Might have been a little bit of an acting job there by Jake Bader to get himself a close-up on the Jumbotron.
That's never happened in any of the sports I've ever covered. Coming in from out of the fog.
Well, Jim, you know it's a big game when the Goodyear Blimp is here.
The Goodyear Blimp, which travels hundreds of miles a year.
Look, the Goodyear Blimp.
For sporting events around the country.
The Goodyear Blimp has a special message for these fans. It says, "Go Mudcats, go Lugnuts. Welcome to the big leagues."
Mudcats, they've got their work cut out for them. So you're going to have almost everything go right to pick up these 5 runs, Charlie.
Absolutely. The Mudcats fans better put their rally caps back on because what we need here today is a rally.
It was a good experience with all the mascots and the Jumbotron. I want to play baseball when I grow up, so I have to get used to that kind of stuff.
Can I get your autograph?
That was really cool, everything that happened. I really felt like I was in the big leagues today.
Today was pretty awesome because most kids don't get a chance like this and get to be on the Jumbotron.
All right, everybody, we got the game ball. We got the game ball. What are we going to do for an encore now? I mean, the rest of the season's going to be boring compared to this.
Well, Jim, I believe that for both of these teams, the Lugnuts and the Mudcats, this will go down as their best game ever.
So for Charlie Todd and Eric Appel of Improv Everywhere, I'm Jim Gray for NBC Sports. Thank you very much for joining us.
What's stopping us from being a church that does that? Amen.